Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for coming here today. I recognize some names of good friends, and I also recognize, I see names that I haven't met before. So I hope we will have an opportunity to chat a little bit. We have prepared these slides that we have used in the past and have worked well to introduce social norms and what social norms are. But you will notice that in the next, probably we have, what do we have? We have 2 hours blocked. Probably we might end up taking the whole 2 hours, or we might have conversations that continue after the 2 hours. And hopefully this presentation today will spark a little bit of new ideas, and will also generate questions that there will be time at the end to discuss. We have also planned some group work so that you will have you will be sent in breakout rooms, and when the time comes, and you will have an opportunity to discuss in small groups with other participants. My name is Ben Cislaghi. I study at the, I work, I don't know if I work or study. The two are often conflated together, but I work at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I study particularly the influence of social norms on health, which is what we are going to talk about today. And hopefully we will also gather your thoughts. So the way these all started, the interest in social norms started, really is from work that was done from the 80s and then the 90s on female genital cutting. And UNICEF asked at the beginning of the millennium, why are these parents practicing female genital mutilation cutting? Female genital mutilation cutting is the partial or total removal of parts of women's genitalia that is usually done when girls are very young. And it might seem a silly question, but they all love their daughters. Obviously, it's not like no parents, unless they. But most parents don't hate their children. Like normal parents love their children. Yes, some thought it was a religious obligation. Some did think it was a religious obligation, but many, actually, not just some, many knew that actually there's nothing in the Quran. Senegal is a mostly Muslim country, 95% Muslim. And these parents many knew that there was nothing in the Quran about FGM being needed to be practiced. In fact, there is only a brief mention in the life of the Prophet, and the Prophet is almost like condemning it. They knew it was dangerous for their daughters. They had seen their daughters dying, infections, hemorrhages. They've seen their daughters screaming in pain. And actually, some would have liked not to do this to their daughters. So the question remained, why were these parents doing it, right? So the reason is that sometimes, this is a mystery, and I promise to answer this mystery, but I feel towards the end of the presentation, but I get a sense that you'll be able to answer this mystery to me. So you might have seen these in your development projects, right? That sometimes people say, oh, people are doing the wrong thing. They're smoking, they're drinking, they are doing domestic violence, whatever. Just tell them that smoking can actually kill them, or just tell them you should send your daughters to school because that way they'll find a job. Or just tell them women should have a right to go outside of the household and work, and they just do it. But of course, we know that's not true. We know that there are many things that come in between. Sometimes it's the money, and this is why we wrote material resources aside. Sometimes some people say, oh, you need to kind of change what people want to do. You need to change their attitudes. But there is something more than just providing knowledge. So let me tell you, this is a story from an intervention in Bolivia. Bolivia is like Uganda. It's a very sunny place, right? It's more or less as close to the equator as Uganda. So mostly sunny, very hot, very warm. Rural Bolivia looks a bit like this. There are all these houses next to each other. And this group of researchers had, so these areas of Bolivia had a serious problem. And the problem was that there was no easily accessible clean water. But the researcher had found a method that you can also use. If you have water that is a bit not quite, well, I mean, it's not mud, but it's water that needs to be cleaning, you can put the water in a plastic bottle and put the plastic bottle under the sun. And in Bolivia, there is a lot of sun. And after 6 to 8 hours, the water, all the bacteria have died. It's a bit like boiling the water, not as effective, but almost, but it's in a way kills, the sun will kill many of the bacteria inside the bottle of water. Now, they did this group of in the intervention, they did a massive media campaign, right? Promotion campaign, radio, everything. They found that people knew about this, but nobody was doing it. So now I'd like to ask you to either type in the chat box or just unmute yourself and tell me, why do you think nobody used this system? Or to be more precise, either nobody used it or everyone used it in every single village. Why is that? What do you think? Let's see if there is anyone who feels like giving an idea. And I heard there are many reasons, so don't worry. No ideas is off the topic. So anything. Let's see. I wonder if I'm seeing Barbara, Becca, Brenda, Hawa, Judith, Julius, Madifa, Margaret, Nora, Ntanze, Polycarp, Rose, Roy. I wonder if any of you has an idea of why people weren't using this fantastic method to clean water. No, no volunteers? It's okay. I am very comfortable. Oh, thank you.
You have some things in the chat box, Ben.
Yeah.
What do you say?
There's some ideas in the chat box, so I can read them to you if you want.
Yes, please. Yes. Thank you.
We have, maybe they did not involve community gatekeepers. Maybe they don't believe it works. Let's see, perhaps they were, Madanda said perhaps they were used to old ways and slow to change or unwilling.
Mm-hmm.
Rose says it's cumbersome. It makes ones whose role it is feel useless.
Mm-hmm.
Some could have thought it might be harmful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they didn't involve community gatekeepers.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca, for reading them out loud. These are great comments, actually. I've never heard these comments, and they might all be true, actually. Some might have thought it was harmful. Maybe they didn't involve community gatekeepers. But part of the reason, maybe limited awareness of information. Well, yes, but the main reason in the end was that they found people were ashamed of being the first one to put the bottle on top of their roofs. So you see, we start by thinking, oh, you just give them new knowledge and they will do the right thing, right? Just tell them that the bottle is good, that putting the water in bottle will clean the water, and they'll do it. Well, it turns out these people didn't, because they were afraid, oh my God, if I put the bottle on top of my roof, my neighbor will know that I'm too poor to afford buying water at the shop. This is why people tended to do in any given village, either everyone tended to do this, because let me see, once Aramanzan does it, then Barbara can do it, then Hawa can do it, then Julius can do it, then Laura can do it, right? Because once the first one does it, then it's true. For the second is easier. For the third is even easier. For the fourth is even easier. For the 50th family is incredibly easier because now everyone is doing it. So I'm not ashamed anymore. But for the first person, it was very difficult to be the ones who weren't rich enough to pay for the bottle at the shop. So I'd like to ask you, have you ever seen similar shortcomings in your interventions when you thought, oh, let's give them just this knowledge and they will do, and this will be enough? Have you ever witnessed or heard or experienced or read about interventions that had similar failure, right? That didn't achieve their goals because they mostly focus um, on the knowledge the participants needed to have. And again, you can type or you can take the microphone. I'd love personally to hear your voice because I get bored with my voice. I hear it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I know some of you have seen interventions failing, but don't worry, this is a safe space. I'm not going to go to your boss and say that you said it. I'm not going to go back to the donor. I'm not going to write a paper on it, I promise. I will forget. Or maybe you've never have. Maybe you're a fantastic group of people who are very lucky. Yeah?
Um, yeah, I've heard of a similar scenario in our part of the country. It was about WASH, water and sanitation interventions in one of the regions, Karamoja.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when the project was rolled out, of course, they gave information and stuff like that. But then I think the program implementers did not probably do a thorough baseline or assessment. So they dug up, because they thought opendification probably was due to lack of pit latrines. So they weren't thorough in the baseline, went ahead, constructed pit latrines, went back after 6 months and found the pit latrines had not been used. And of course, the locals had their own reasons why they weren't using the pit latrines.
Thank you. I really love this example, Nora. Thank you very much. And then there are 2 examples also in the chat. Aramanzan says, there are examples of people refusing to clean water sources. Thank you. And Muine, I think, Muine Mona Shaba says, policy information on the existence of FGM law, but it exists. Yes, that's a beautiful example. Thank you. These were really 3 important examples. And Rose also says, we've been introducing menstrual cups and women and girls are hesitant to use these. Not many want to acknowledge that they have to insert the cup, has to do a lot with issues with virginity, values, etc., etc. Yes, exactly, right? So sometimes science advances and we learn new ways of doing things, but there is a resistance, a social resistance. And part of the social resistance comes from social norms. So what are social norms? So many of you, I'm sure there are many sociologists and philosophers and political scientists and psychologists. So I need to apologize, first of all, because there are many ways in which social norms can define and explain. The definition I'm going to give particularly comes from social psychology. And well, this actually doesn't come from social psychology. This comes from me losing time on Google, finding funny images to describe social norms. But at the very basis, social norms are really rules that give us, they create a map of the acceptable actions, the normal actions, right? Which is why a social norm. the normal action in a given group, which is why this little chicken is now walking on crutches to be a flamingo. So we said these are really rules about what is acceptable, what is appropriate, what is not acceptable, what is not appropriate in a given society or in a given group of people. We call that group of people the reference group. So for instance, now we have, by inviting you to take the microphone and by asking you to put your comments on the chat, we made it acceptable for you, when called forward, to intervene in the microphone. You know, with the microphone, you know that I will not judge you negatively if at my invitation you take the microphone. So in our group, we created a new norm. And examples include of norms that you might have experienced. I don't know. For instance, bringing gifts after a travel abroad, right? If from Nigeria you go to the United States or to Cameroon or to Italy, and then when you come back, when I lived in Senegal, every time I came back, I needed to go to the market and buy gifts from the Dakar market, because everyone asked me gifts from the United States, but I couldn't bring all those gifts in my luggage, right? Or I think you have the same in Nigeria. If someone is coming to visit you, you say, hey, would you like a glass of water? Or if you're eating, you invite them to eat with you. And these norms are often maintained by sanctions, and we are going to see later on what sanctions are. Now, social norms are actually good. They're not a bad thing in themselves, because knowing the social norms that exist in a group, it makes me relax. Okay, if I know what's expected of me, okay, I am in this group, I know that now I need to, I don't know, it's a group of male elders and I'm a man, and I know that I know that I need to shake hands with everyone is happy. Actually, our blood pressure goes down. And also, when we feel accepted in a group, and we feel accepted in a group because we play by the rules of that group, we feel better, right? And there is evidence of that. So what this is telling us is that social norms, which are by, and if you have questions on why we have social norms, it's a fascinating story that goes back to when we were living in caves, and I can tell you a little bit about it if you have a question. But anyway, having social norms help us live together. But sometimes these social norms can also, complying with these rules, can also be very harmful. Here's an example of women having to put high heels when needing to be at very important business meetings, right? And we know that's very bad for joints, for knees. And on the other side of the slide is an example of a corset that was used in the 1800s. And look at what that does to a woman's body, right? It reduces the space for organs, but that was the standard of beauty. And in the center, there is a man who's missing a hand. If we have time, I'll tell you his story. But he's missing a hand because he was trying to comply with social norms. And I put these three images because very often we associate harmful social norms with Africa, which I think is a bit arrogant and colonialist. So by saying, look, actually, humans are capable of horrible behaviors all around the world, I'm trying to challenge a little bit the idea that there is a place where all the problems are and a place where all the solutions are. So now, if I were to give you a definition of social norms that you can write down, I will tell you that social norms are beliefs. Now, you can think of beliefs as existing across three different spaces. Or you can say that every human person has three types of beliefs. The first type of beliefs is, well, the beliefs that I have about the world. So for instance, you might believe that the sun will come up tomorrow. You might believe that if you drop a stone in a lake, the stone will go down. These are beliefs about things, if you like, or about how the world functions. Then you have a second type of beliefs that are beliefs about yourself. You might think, oh, I can do this. I am someone who speaks well, or I am someone who is capable of loving my children. And then you have a third type of beliefs, and these are beliefs about other people. Social norms are a type of beliefs that you have about other people, and specifically two types of beliefs that you have about other people. The first type is what you believe that others in your group do. So for instance, if you want to get to work and you know that everyone goes to work at 9 a.m. and the street will be full of traffic, you might leave your house at 9:30 because you believe that everyone will be in the street at 9. And the second type of belief is what you believe others in your group approve and disapprove of. So for instance, if you're still going to work and you think, oh, I'd like to put my swimming suit today at the office, but you might think, oh, wait a second, but what will people think about me, right? They will shake their finger like the woman in the picture. So I'd rather put my normal business clothes on. There are many names. The first type of beliefs are called descriptive norm because they describe reality. The second type of norms are called injunctive norms because they give you an injunction, right? They tell you you have to do this or that. Okay, I'll stop here for a second, just for a minute, and see if there is any comments or questions on this. Otherwise, I will move forward. I'll stay silent for 30 seconds, and you can put questions in your chat or take the microphone. Okay. So I will assume that it's all clear. I rather want you to ask me a million questions than trick me into believing that I'm being very eloquent and then realizing that I was actually terribly confused. Okay, a little bit of focus on descriptive norms. So the descriptive norms really is the first type of beliefs, what people believe that other in the group do. We tend to organize our life in bubbles. It's kind of the sheep thing, right? My friends all tend to speak like me, talk like me. We have the similar feelings. And that's because we have an innate desire to comply with other people's behavior. This is an experiment. This is a comic made on the basis of an experiment, famous experiment on the bystander effect. Bystander effect. So here, it's a true experiment. What the researchers did, they put people at the corner of a street, looking up, and like 4 or 5 people, and then they watched as people started stopping on the road. And all of a sudden, there were so many people that the police intervened because they were stopping traffic. So this was just not by using a single word, but just by putting people look up at the sky. And this is a small video that I find very funny that I'd like to play for you. Let me know if you can see it okay. And if you can't, I'll put it online.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera. Never go along with this.
So in this story,
simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you?
What they're doing is the woman in purple is the participants. Everyone else is a researcher in a way. You could put it that way. And they all standing up, they're actors. And this woman is looking around and saying, what is happening? Why is everyone standing up? And what do you think you would do? Would you start standing up or not? Let's see what this woman does.
After just 3 beats, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
So now everyone will go. I will cut a little bit. But what's fascinating, she's still doing the behavior on her own. But what's fascinating is now new people come in.
Watch what happens when
These are not actors, these are patients as well in the clinic. And she is also a patient. So let's see what happens.
introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
So he's very confused, right? And he's asking her, why are you doing it?
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do?
So, and there you go. They will
We kept the
start
cameras
creating a new
with
culture.
stuff going on in their brain.
They will start creating a new culture within this, and they will all stand up, including this guy who will try until the last minute to resist the peer pressure, but he will eventually conform. And this has happened in just a few minutes. So imagine what can happen when you have centuries of practices, right? When you go back to the example on female genital cutting, this is not just 10 minutes, but it's been hundreds of years of generations doing the same thing over and over again. And people in marketing strategy, they know exactly how descriptive norms are powerful. This is why McDonald's, under the logo says, "Oh, we served millions of hamburgers," or this is why when you see, you're much more likely to click like on Facebook when you see that 1,000 people have clicked like than when you see that nobody has clicked like, right? And then, as I said, the second type of belief is injunctive norms. This is there's another funny video that I'll put in the slides and you can go watch it. But these are two books that I found one day walking in a bookshop, right? The first on the left is, the title of this book, I'll say, how to be a lady, as a lady would say, a lady at the table, 50 things every young lady should know. And then there is how to raise a lady. And then on the right, a gentleman at the table, a gentleman walks down the aisle, a gentleman abroad. So these are almost instructions. If you want to be considered a gentleman, then you need to walk down the aisle this way. If you want to be considered a lady, not just a woman, but a lady, which is honorable, then you need to sit down and do this at the table. So we have all these norms and these ideas of what I am supposed to do to be approved, to be called a gentleman, to be called a lady, but also what do I need to do to be approved in this group? So it's not just about the good manners, but in general, the appropriate manners to be considered members of a group. And a group of adolescent men can be particularly creative in the rules that they have in the group to be considered men, right? So you will find adolescent men doing competitions about who drives faster, or who drinks more, or who takes more drugs, or who's ruder, right? And these are all rules that exist in a group to be approved of. I mentioned sanctions. Sanctions are also part of a belief tightly related to injunctive norms. And that's the belief that, oh, if I comply with the norm, I will receive positive sanctions. If I don't comply with the norm, I will receive negative sanctions. So here's a boy who puts the wrong hat on. You see everyone else has a blue hat. He has a red hat, and he's being laughed at. So negative sanctions include gossiping, include being ostracized, being threatened, being beaten up, being killed. And positive sanctions might include a promotion, being considered an elder, being respected, being called with a different name, a positive name. So as we said, now this might make a little bit more sense. So social norms are these unwritten rules of a group that group members follow because of what they think others do, what they think others approve and disapprove of. and they anticipate positive and negative sanctions for compliers and not compliers. Very importantly, a social norm is not a personal attitude. The two things are very different. So here's an example of a little story to clarify the two. Imagine, imagine it's your brother's wedding, right? And you have a little daughter, and this little daughter's name could be, let me say this, the name of some of you. This little daughter's name could be Barbara Mirembe. I'll take your name, if I may. So Barbara is getting ready for this wedding, and you are her parent. And the parent comes downstairs, Barbara comes downstairs dressed as in the picture on the left. And she says, I'm ready for the wedding. This is my personal attitude. This is what I want for my life. This is how I want to come to this wedding. And you say, oh, no, 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 no. Why? Because even if you're okay with it, you start thinking about the man in the center, maybe granddad or a grandma. And you think, oh, if I take you like this at the wedding, everyone will talk about me. They will say I'm not a good parent. Oh, no, 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 no. Barbara, go back upstairs and get changed. And so Barbara might get changed and she's unhappy. You see on the right-hand picture, this is not what she wanted to do, but she had to comply with the norm and get dressed as appropriate for a wedding. So again, on the left, what she wanted to do, her personal attitude. On the right, what she had to do to comply with the norm. Now, what do we know? We know that social norms, we have evidence that influences, and I'm about to ask you if you have witnessed similar norms, but norms that influence child marriage, female genital cutting, family planning, women's economic empowerment, child vaccination, intimate partner violence, hand washing, maternal health, and so on and so forth. And these examples of harmful social norms include stuff like, just to give you some examples from real life. Well, here's an adolescent that says, I don't like smoking. That's my personal attitude. I don't like it. But I have to do it to fit in. I have to do it to look cool. And here's another one, in the second example, another adolescent that says, to be honest, I hate drinking. I hate being drunk. My head spins. The day after, I feel all sick. But I've just gone to university and I want to be approved. I want to be liked, so I have to do it. The third example is the story of that adolescent who received a helmet for Christmas and said, oh, but I cannot wear a helmet when cycling. They're just for geeks, right? In this town, people of my age cycle without the helmet. And then two examples. These are actually from Uganda. It's the first time that I present them to a Ugandan audience. The first one says, oh yeah, actually not true. The second one is from Uganda. The first one is from another study. So the first one says, yes. So it's about bullying at school. And participants said, yes, I'd like to stand up for this student who's been bullied. But then if I'm seen with him, I'll be disapproved. You know, and I don't want to be disapproved, so I don't defend the students because my norm is I will be disapproved for being seen next to him. And then finally, this is from Western Uganda. We were doing a study on violence against children at school, and these other teachers told us, I see teachers hitting children, I do, and I'd like to report them. But nobody does that. Nobody reports teachers. And so if I do it, I'll be ostracized. I'll be called the policeman. So now going back to the mystery, you remember I told you, why did parents practice female genital mutilation and cutting in Senegal? Well, what UNICEF found is that these parents thought everyone in the village got their daughters cut. Everyone in the village approved of them getting their daughters cut. And that if they didn't get their daughters cut, they would be considered bad parents and their daughters won't get married. So many of these parents did something they did not want to do, which was getting the daughters cut. Of course, you also had parents who believed it was good for the daughter, who believed it was a religious obligation, but it was fascinating to see these parents who did not want to do this, and yet they were doing it because of the social norm. Okay, why don't we stop here for a little minute and we take comments, questions, clarifications. We can chat a little bit. We have we can take 10 minutes, whatever, or 15, whatever is necessary at this point.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
This is Paul. I have a comment.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you indeed. You are sharing very interesting experiences. I remember that one time I was in Sudan, in a village near Khartoum, and actually I was talking to a grandmother who was about 75 years. And she told me that even in her next life, she will support FGM, although she could tell me some of its negative consequences. But she said she will not force anybody to do FGM, but even in her next life, she will support FGM.
Thank you, Paul. This is fascinating to me. And you know, this reminds me of a woman I've met in Senegal who had gone through FGM and who had all sorts of horrible health issues, who had her sexual and reproductive health was severely compromised. And yet she was divorced, she had escaped to the car, she had a daughter, and yet she said, I will get my daughter cut because I cannot face the shame of the ancestors. So even in this case, the norm was towards ancestors, not even towards people who were alive. Thank you for sharing this, Paul. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we have anyone else. I'd be curious to know what you are working on and how is this resonating with the work that you do. And if you have any questions or comments or anything.
Hi, Ben. This is Amon, Makerere University. I wanted to pick up on one of the things that you pointed out in the definition of social norms, the idea of doing things because of what we think others are doing. Where does that kind of approach leave the conversation on individual agency? The other second one is what I have met in the work that I do, teaching and researching critical masculinities. We've met, conversations where men are told to do the different, possibly moving from the norm to do alternative, positive, and progressive, but without, I think, focusing on what you are bringing forth, the cost of challenging social norms. For instance, asking, what kind of competencies, skill, and resource do men have to do different forms of masculinities? So I found your reflection on the kind of fear of being disapproved really a possible scenario in which majority of the men may not do perform progressive masculinities because of the cost that is involved in doing the different. So those are the two things that possibly you can reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you, Amon. These are very important points. And I think for policymakers and interventions, we have a responsibility to, when we create social norms programs, because yes, the people who will go against the norm will face consequences. In Nigeria, we have used VAX data, and we have found that women in Nigeria who lived in villages where most women were not going to work outside of the household, those women who did go and work outside of the household were the minority, but so they were going against the norm, and they were experiencing much more violence from their partners than the women who did not, who stayed home. So going against the norm was bringing greater experience of violence. So that means, where does that leave, with what responsibility that leaves us as practitioners? Because we are working with populations that might suffer as a result of our intervention. And that's a very, very important point. And so the response to that is, we need to understand the community. There is a tool called the Community Readiness tool that Bettina Shell-Duncan developed. And it's understanding what is the best moment to challenge the norm. And are we being completely honest and with our participants that if they want to be activists of the new norm, as in the case of the men that you mentioned, they might be sanctioned, and the agents of change, the first ones, the visionaries, the brave ones, might eventually contribute to changing the status quo into a better status quo, but they themselves might suffer because of that. So that's my first comment. And your second point about agency is so important and so complex. So in a way, I believe that 99 up to 100% of the decisions that we do in our life are not actually the result of agency, because agency is something that it's a muscle, requires a lot of effort and capacity. If you ask me, did I exercise agency when I decided to go to university? Well, I think I exercised agency in deciding what to study, but I never really considered not going to university, because I am the son of two people who went to university. So then free agency is impossible, right? I believe that making a free choice is it's not impossible, but it's very challenging, because it requires awareness of all the influences that are pushing us towards one or the other or the other or the other choice, and then be careful and listen to ourselves and what we deeply want. And as you say, this is not an easy task. Thank you for your comment, Amon. Grace, I see that you have a hand raised. I don't know if that's because you want to intervene.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I've been having a challenge with my mic, but now it's sorted out. Really, thank you so much. I'd like you to clarify on the two words or concepts in relation to social norms. Some people, there's the issue of behavior, and then there is the issue of practice. In the research we have been working on, on child marriage, and some people call that a social norm, that our girls here, they get married at a certain age. But then in the same community, those who don't get married early, they actually admired. There are no negative sanctions against them. And there has been a really very big debate whether people should call child marriage a social norm. So can you clarify more on that, because it has really been confusing for very many. And the second project which you are working in is on sexual harassment, and I'm glad Amon is here. And it took us, the females, by surprise when the men are saying what is the social norm relating to sexual harassment. For them, as a young man growing up, touching a woman is expected. If you don't touch a woman, then something is wrong with you, and the fellow boys will laugh at you, and so on. And so those kinds of and for me, I think that's really terrible, bad behavior. And for them, they call it, a social norm, for masculinity. Yeah, that is the.
Thank you, Grace. we will see this in more detail after the group work, but for now I can tell you, but I think your point about the difference between the practice and the norm is very important. So let me clarify that. Something can, so what people actually do is their practice, right? So female genital cutting can be both a practice and a norm. Other things may only be a practice, and other things may only be a norm. So FGMC is a practice because people are doing it that is sustained by norms that they are supposed to practice female genital cutting. So in the same way in which when you meet someone in Italy, you shake hands, and the shaking hands is the practice that is sustained by my belief that I'm supposed to shake hands, that I will be approved if I shake hands with this other person that I'm meeting. So the social norm is in my mind. The practice is what I actually do. And what I actually do might or might not be related to the belief of that I have in my mind about whether I'll be approved or disapproved for complying with the practice. Okay, so the correct formulation would be, I think, to say a female genital cutting is a practice sustained by what we will see later, a direct social norm. And we will discuss in the slides after the group work the difference between direct and indirect social norms. But I understand. Is this helping? Is this helping clarify the confusion?
Yeah. I think yeah, it's a good clarity, because we are always having this debate. What is the boundary between just the practice, which people just easily do, and it becomes common. But then now you're clarifying it that this practice, but it's also being informed by what you believe in your mind, what others expecting you to do, or what is expected of you, which makes it clear now.
Thank you. I'm glad. Okay. Do we have any other comments? Otherwise, we can have a small group discussion. So what I'd like to suggest is that we go into breakout rooms for 15 minutes. So it's now 51. We can come back at 5 past and discuss what harmful norms come to your mind that are relevant in the work that you are doing in Uganda. Or there is a question by Amon before we go into group discussion. Is there a possibility that a practice can gradually congeal into what I believe in? Yes, practice and norms can influence each other, right? So it's possible that I end up believing that what I've been taught and what I've been doing and what everyone is doing is what will be approved of me. So the two are in relation, but it's also possible that, for instance, everyone in Uganda might like to drink. I don't know if you have Vimto, which is this kind of Coca-Cola. Let's say Coca-Cola. Everyone in Uganda drinks Coca-Cola, but so it's a widely common practice, but it's not. There is no expectation. But you can drink Sprite and you will not be disapproved. So, but yes, the two can be related. Thank you, Amon, for that question. Okay, so we will now send you into random breakout rooms. We would love for you to discuss in the next 15 minutes the harmful norms that come to work, that come to your mind, that are relevant in your work. And I'll see you back at 5 past the hour. Okay, perfect. I'd like to hear a little bit from the group discussions. What came up? Is there any particularly interesting norm that emerged from your group discussion? I wonder if someone could report back from the work of their group.
In group 4, we are back. I think our person who took our minutes, Judith, can you report back?
Yes, thank you. So for group 4, we discussed quite a number of norms. At first, we started with the one of sexual harassment that Grace was talking about, that some men are uploaded for really doing that, and those who don't do it, they are actually seen as not normal or even weak. And then we also talked about gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, where we discussed that beating women is usually normal, and there is usually limited or no sanctions to those who actually do that. And then we talked about men also facing gender-based violence, but most of them suffer in silence. Why? Because men are known to be strong. So when they face violence from the women, they stay silent about it. And then we also talked about that this violence is usually seen as a positive instruction to correct a woman for what they have done wrong. So that's what we had around gender-based violence. Then we talked about health, especially reproductive health, issues under family planning and maternal health, where we identify that it's a taboo in communities to talk about sexual health as one of the social norms. And then usually it is the man who decides on the number of children to produce, and if that couple can use family planning. So for the economic point, we discussed that income for women is usually considered petty. The income that women get in a home is usually considered petty, and most often is used for subsistence. It's not used for like get the big things in a home like land and all the rest. And then before we got back to the team, we're talking about leadership, that also one of the norms is taking on leadership positions or roles for women is often a challenge. Why? Because sometimes they put stringent requirements that sometimes the women cannot afford. And we were discussing an example there where someone was sharing an experience, and they had said that for the woman to take on this role, they must be married. And then I think something like issues of the costs that are implied in getting a leadership position. Yeah, that's what we discussed. Unless if there's anything I left out from my group members, you can add. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. That was very interesting. I wonder if there is another group who has some interesting thoughts.
So for room 1, one of the norms that we discussed was decision making at the household level being dominated by the male gender, and that has an impact on the number of children a family can have. So you find that women may suffer since they don't have the right to decide the number of children, or rather they can't make an authoritative decision in regards to engaging or taking birth control. And then the other norm was tendency of senior people to give responsibilities to either younger male or female. The example that was given was taking of minutes in a meeting. You find that senior people tend to either elect or appoint younger people to take the minutes, or rather women within the meeting. And then the other thing is on MHM, in terms of menstrual hygiene management, you find that there's an assumption that only female caregivers should handle MHM products. So it's only a mother who can buy their daughter, or an aunt who can buy their daughter a menstrual product. And you find that there'll be an issue there'll be an issue when the caregiver is male. So you find that they're not able to buy menstrual health products for their the people they're in charge of. So, and also the issue of secrecy around menstruation. So that's also another norm, that no male should know about periods, or rather should know when girls are on their periods. And then the other thing was on medicalization of FGM. The example was given, the health workers in Sudan. You find that it's actually the midwives and it's actually the medical practitioners that perform the FGM. And when asked why they're doing that, they're like, there are things that can go beyond culture and religion. Despite the knowledge, they still have to practice that. And then there's this assumption of, for example, if there's a heavy stuff that needs lifting, you hear leave that to the men because they're seen to be stronger or something. Yeah, that's all we discussed. And people from room one, feel free to add in if I left out anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
I can share what we discussed in our group. The first one was about women being expected to get married, and the fact that when they divorce, the society feels they have failed. They also feel they have failed. So the norm is that women should be married, and the same doesn't happen for the man, because when the marriage fails, it's the woman who has failed, and she's expected to enter another relationship. The other one is about purchasing some foodstuffs like meat, for example, in the rural areas from the butcher, that the man who is expected to be the one to stand there and buy, and the woman is not expected to do so. So it's harmful because the household might actually be able to afford the meat and need the meat, but if the man is not around, they are not able to get it, or they have to send someone else, and this might mean incurring some other costs. Then the other one was about the expectation that people should have masculine or feminine traits or gender, and deviating from this, like if a person has male biological traits, but is exhibiting feminine characteristics or behavior, that these are, the norm is to not be comfortable with them and to be thrown out even from their homes and being homeless. So that expectation that people should be subscribing to one group or the other, either feminine or masculine. So those are the ones that we discussed in our group, and the team can add on if I've left out anything or misrepresented it.
Thank you, Margaret. Great. These are all great. No, I don't know if there is any other group who wants to share before we move forward. Thank you, Margaret. I really like the butcher norm. I didn't know that. Margaret shared it in our team. Yeah, I don't know if there is anyone who wants to share. I know we had quite a few groups. Otherwise, we can just move forward. Yeah, unless I was hoping to hear some other new norms, but if there is anyone who has, oh, this norm is actually very interesting and unusual, speak now. Or what's the sentence? Or remain in silence forever. Okay, it looks like it's going to be silence forever. Okay. Okay, so this was excellent, and I'm really glad of all the stuff. I hope that you had as many interesting contributions as in the other groups as the groups who presented did. Now, I'd like to share some slightly advanced points, right? This is stuff that requires what we said before to have been understood, so that we can then make a few extra points. The first point is that norms can apply both within very small groups and very big societies. So you might have norms that apply to the whole Uganda, and you might have norms that apply to your group of friends or to your group of colleagues. Now, the point is that the intervention is very different if you are targeting a norm within a group of friends or you're targeting a norm within a society. Why is that? Well, in this little comic on the left, you see an adolescent who's thinking, oh, maybe I should smoke too. That girl wants to be approved by those 3 people, right? If she decides to pick up to smoke to impress them, it's because she wants to be approved by those people specifically. So if you want to change the norm within that group, then you need to put in conversation those 4 people about, and possibly we will discuss this when we get to changing social norms, but in another session. But this will be probably about starting from developing new attitudes across the 4 against smoking, and then eventually providing also information, and then eventually offering support for the biological and medical, biological dependency, addiction, and then, but in terms of social norms, you need to make sure that these 4 people talk about, confess to each other how they dislike of people who, once they develop this new attitude, how they dislike of people who smoke. In the right-hand side of the slide instead, you see a society. In this case, if you're walking across in the market, behaving in a certain way, it's not because you know specifically everyone who's watching you, but because you have very predetermined, acceptable ways of being that are in the ethos of the society. In this case, as you will see later, other approaches might be more helpful. You can't put the whole market in conversation, but you might start doing media campaigns. You might start doing policy work that would challenge and that would facilitate, would magnify voice of dissent with existing norms. The second point, and this is I don't remember if, I don't know if you had this in Uganda, but in the UK, at a certain point, all children had this thing called Pokemon Go, which was a game on their phone. And I remember a BBC service when this child said, oh, if you can't get one, you're not part of the gang, right? Which I found very interesting, how having to spend money for a game made you part of the gang. Okay, this relates to something that was mentioned before by, I think it was Grace who asked this question, right? The difference between a norm and a practice. So sometimes the norm and the practice overlap, or they are specular, symmetrical, like a mirror, one the mirror of the other. For instance, in the example on the left, you have the practice of female genital cutting, and that practice is sustained by a norm that if I would practice female genital cutting, I would be approved. We call that relation as direct relation between the practice and the norms. Some other times, you don't exactly have a norm that is the exact mirror of the practice, but you might have a constellation of norms that facilitate, that contribute to keeping the practice in place. So here's an example. In some places, we found that domestic violence was a practice, but there was no norm associated to it. That is, the men didn't believe that, oh, if I hit my wife, I will be approved. In other places, actually, this was actually the case. But for now, let's stick with our minds to places in which men hit their wives, but not because they're seeking approval or not because they anticipate approval. But then you have norms, for instance, norms that family honor should be protected. So the wife or other people witnessing the violence will not talk about it. Or the family privacy should be protected so that the neighbors who hear about the violence do not intervene because it's not my role. Or that women are expected to tolerate violence to keep the family together. So these norms are together contributing to keeping domestic violence in place. Now, if you look, maybe you do a formative research and people say, oh no, hitting your wife is a very bad thing and nobody expects you to do it. And then you think, okay, social norms don't actually matter here. But actually, there are social norms that are facilitating the practice of domestic violence. And these are 3 examples. So, of course, a practice can be sustained by multiple indirect norms. And some of these norms may sustain more than one practice. So you have here practice X, which might sustain by a constellation of norms. And these norms might, by the way, also sustain, some of these norms might also sustain different practices. You see that the size of the circle is intended to say some norms might be more important than others. And here's my second last point. So norms are in a system of structural factors that intersect and sustain action and practices. So this is called the flower framework that we developed. And the idea here is that, in a way, norms interact with institutional factors such as laws, right? I don't remember before somebody said there is a law on FGMC and yet people are doing it anyway. With individual factors such as education, aspiration, skills, with social factors such as availability of deviant models, social network support, family configuration. And then finally with material factors such as availability of services, transport, infrastructure, the assets. Somebody in our group mentioned land. I think it was Margaret talking about how it's different for a man or a woman to be divorced because the man will have land and the woman won't. And so on top of that, there is the norm of being unacceptable for a norm to be divorced, and how all these factors intersect. And finally, I want to just spend a few minutes. Let me just check the time. Yeah, perfect. I want to spend just a few minutes to talk about gender norms. So gender norms are a concept that has been developed in the feminist. Actually, to be honest, the term gender first appeared in the gender as a dysfunction, gender in the so-called gender dysphoria. At the time, it was considered a mental health issue. And these were, for instance, men who felt that they were women. So that's the first time that the term gender emerged. And then feminist sociology took the term to indicate the system, the social order that creates hierarchies between people of different genders. Gender norms are specifically one piece of the puzzle, and they've been defined in many different ways, but in the end, we suggest that we might borrow some concepts of social norms theory to define gender norms as social norms defining appropriate action for women and men. And to give you an example of that story, of what these actions are, I want to tell you a little story. So the story is from India. And it's one of our colleagues from Gates who told me this story in the past. So he was implementing an intervention to reduce lead poisoning. So as part of this intervention, they were painting in red all the pipes that you shouldn't drink from, and in green, all the safe pipes. So he's doing an evaluation, and he goes to a village and starts talking to the village chief, right? And he says, okay, well, can you tell me what lead poisoning is? And the village chief is very knowledgeable. He knows everything about how the illness progresses, the disease progresses, and that it kills you. And so my friend is about to leave, and then he said, oh, but by the way, where do you get your water from? And sure enough, the village chief is getting the water from the green pipe. And so my friend is very confused and says, but what are you why are you doing this? You're killing yourself and your entire family. And the village chief said, yeah, but I'd rather do that than allow my wife or my daughter to go alone to the neighbor's house where there is the green pipe. And then my friend said, well, can't you go and get the water then? And then my friend said, no, because carrying water is women's responsibility. So there you go. There's a gender norm that was making it so that women Oh yeah, sorry, he was drinking from the red pipe. I should have mentioned. I think I was colorblind there for a second. So he preferred to drink from the red pipe and give to his water, to his family, lead poisoning, rather than allowing or letting her wife or daughter go to the neighbor's house where there was a green pipe, because he was afraid of what people would say about the family, the female family, members of his family. Okay. Oh, and then I want to close. This is the story. I told you, we'll tell you the story of this man. I think some of you working on masculinity might enjoy this story. This is a story from drilling platforms, right? So these platforms are platforms when you drill out petrol, oil from the ocean. And these are incredibly dangerous places, right? People die like flies on here, and these are very, very, very well-paid jobs, but it will kill people. So this man told the story of how one day he was there, something happened, and one of his friends was caught into a snapping of a cable, and his colleague died. And they did it right there. They took the body right there, like the minute this man died, they took the body, 5-minute funeral, and then they went back to work. And this man, and then there's a whole story behind it, but essentially of how they changed this masculinity. But essentially the point here is that these men were all afraid of asking for help. They were all afraid of saying, I don't know how to do this, or I'm scared, or I don't feel comfortable doing this. And because of that, because of these masculinity norms that didn't allow them to be vulnerable, they took immense risks that sometimes led them to mutilation or death. And there is a story of how this changed over time. Okay, so what are the key takeaways from today's session? Number one, social norms exist in two types, in two flavors. Descriptive norms, what I believe other people in my group do, and injunctive norms, what I believe other people in my group approve of. The second key takeaway is that different social norms apply across different groups. And if you've ever traveled, I'm sure that you see that maybe if any of you was born in a rural village and now lives in Kampala, you are perfectly capable of traveling across these different worlds and change your behavior according to the people you have around you, which is fascinating to me, right? Because in a way we think that we are coherent human beings, but we're not. We just play along with the rules of the place in which we are. The third takeaway point is that different social norms can together sustain a practice. So it's not necessarily one practice, one social norms. The fourth key takeaway is that social norms can be the main driver or not. They often intersect with other factors that are not social norms. And the last takeaway is that some norms specifically contribute to define men's and women's place in the group. And those are the gender norms. And yes, we will share the PowerPoint, Aramanzan. Great, so we will also share some further readings for you. And I wonder, so first of all, I will stop here for a second and see if there is any questions or comments since we are moving now towards the end of the session.
Yes, thank you, Ben. This is Judy. Well, we are presenting the last slide. I was thinking and wondering that, okay, trying to see how the different ascribed roles for the men and the women fit into the social norms. And it's good that you put it here in the takeaways that usually some norms specifically contribute to defining men's roles and men and women's roles. So I was just thinking to myself and was wondering if I'm explaining to someone what the social norms are and the gender norms, how can I draw that kind of distinction? Because usually when you talk about social norms or gender norms, immediately the first thing that someone thinks about are the different roles that are ascribed to the men and the women. And we've seen them in these examples that we discussed even in the group work and what you presented. But I'm still thinking, like, how do you draw that clear, distinction and know that this uh, is a social norm and this, is either a gender norm and falls under the ascribed role. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You broke up for me a little bit, so I only heard part of your question. I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I think it could be my network. So I was just thinking that as we wrap up, just in probably a sentence or two, what would I say or you would tell someone is that clear distinction between the social norm and the gender norm. Is the gender norm, part of the social norm? It's one of the components of the social norm. So if I identify the social norm, how can I show that clear distinction or difference or yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I know we've seen a number of examples from the group work, the discussions that we had. We've also seen it from your presentation, but just to draw that clarity and tell someone, this is it for the social norm and how, different or linked it is to the ascribed roles. Yeah, thank you.
So is on the difference, specifically clarity between social and gender norms. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, look, I know not everyone agrees with me, but I think it's easier to think of gender norms as a subset of social norms. So you have certain norms that are not gendered. For instance, putting on seat belts or not when you enter into the car. You might, or you might click like on Facebook when everyone else does, just because you see a number. Or when you see, oh, these restaurants has a 5-star review on Google, let's go there. That's all a social norm, it's all unexpected. You trust this Google stuff, but instead gender norms, and gender norms are just, to be honest, one category of norms that has got to do with identity. But anyway, gender norms are a subset of norms that specifically contribute to the manifestation of your gender in a given society. So, for instance, when you're getting married, if you're a woman, you're not supposed to put on a jacket, a tie, a shirt, trousers. You're supposed to put a white dress with a skirt. So this is the example of a gender norm. Or as another example, the example I made before about the fact that women are the ones might be or the ones that Margaret gave us, right? That men are allowed to buy meat, but women are not allowed to buy meat. Okay. And of course, yes, Grace is men, is women, is also, there might be gender norms specifically to transgender people or to people who identify with other genders. But then at the same time, you might have norms of class norms, right? It's just that they're less studied. So you might say, oh, I don't know, let me think of an example of a class norm, but oh, I go to university even though I really want to become a mechanic, but I have to go to university because I'm a child of upper class. You might have race norms, and even though this applies less, the place where you have most of those is the United States that I've ever found in my life. you might have religious social norms, which are not religious norms, but social norms that they follow because of religious, because I want to manifest my identification with a given religion, and so on and so forth. So yeah, thank you. Very good comment. I wonder if we have other questions or comments.
I have a question, Ben. On the takeaway number 1, the way it is phrased, it's talking about one's, one believes, others, like it's personal. And yet, when you are sharing, the norms were more about the communal or societal, what the society considers normal. And then what one thinks is more the attitude. So if you could clarify on that, because the way it is summarized here, it's more at an individual level beliefs, but yet which kind of differs from the way you had explained earlier.
So this theory comes from social psychology, right? Which, as you know very well, is the study of the connection of how, well, I mean, every social psychologist would probably strangle me with their hands now, but let's say it's the study of how individuals' beliefs contribute and in turn are influenced by collective practices. So the norm is studied, the norm from this theory is studied as the belief of individuals, but the way in which these beliefs then structure society when they go unchallenged is that they create collective practices and relations. So the fact that there might be a social norm that you may summarize by saying women are not supposed to go out and buy meat. Well, yes, it's true. And then, I mean, to measure it, you may want to then ask individually what women and men of a given group believe to be true. So the norm manifests itself or resides or is maintained by what is inside people's minds, and then is embodied and translated into a set of rules and practices that, if unchallenged, can pass over through time and generations. I don't know if that's clear or
yes,
more confused.
Thank you. It is.
Okay, do we have any other comment?
Thank you, Ben. I just wanted to ask if there are some norms that maybe start out as very neutral, and then maybe because of something embedded in one's mind, or maybe because of a certain behavior that is expected of it, then a specific gender takes it on. Where would we place it? Because I'll give an example. I've watched riders on the street in Arua. What fascinates me is that when it is when the riders are riding, a number of them try to to be bold and that kind of thing. And I usually wonder, is it because it's associated to men being seen as bold, wanting to maybe show off and acting or whatever cool it is? Or would it also be that if a woman was riding this bicycle or a boda, they would also try to, maybe ride without because a lot of them will ride without side mirrors. And when you ask them, why do you ride without mirrors? Then they say, like, fine, we want to look, we need to show we are bold. We need to show we don't fear. We need to show we've learned. And I keep wondering, if a woman was riding, would she also feel comfortable riding without this? And I'm like, does it start out as something very neutral that anybody would do it? But then now, because a lot of the people that are riding are men, then we see that as a practice among the men riders. I mean, I keep on like wondering what exactly is influencing that kind of thing, and whether would say that is a neutral practice, or is it still more focused around the genders?
I don't know. I think we need to study, but so I just say two things. The first thing, I don't believe there is anything biological that makes. Actually, that's not true. No, I was going to say something that but let's say, okay, let's say this. Good or negative morality are as much in men as they are in women, right? And I do believe that power corrupts men as much as it corrupts women. So it just happens that men tend to have it. But I think compassion is difficult. Now, to your specific question, I do think that constructions of masculinity as being bold, as being reckless, which are also partly, but in small percentage, I believe, but then nobody will ever have an answer to that, I think. But partly affected by biology. But I think construction of masculinity are the men need to be reckless, right? Because we need to be the ones who go to war and defend our family, and we don't worry, we will, we need to be like Mel Gibson, or what's the name of the other one? Bruce Willis, right? And so of course, especially men in adolescence and young adulthood. So I don't know. I suspect that women probably wouldn't drive that way, but because construction of masculinity don't integrate that. Now, the real question is, and the real problem, and my real fear is that in trying to achieve gender equality, the risk is that we don't honor what's intimately feminine in women's energy, and we end up saying that gender equality equals women becoming men. So if we create the construction that into a woman that is not okay to be kind, right? That you need to be strong, and that strong means to be an asshole, because I shouldn't have said the word, but needs to be unkind, because that's the construction of the men that we see in power. Then maybe women will also get into this toxic masculinity, will absorb this toxic masculinity stuff. But I hope that actually we can do the opposite, that we can construct new gender norms in which, instead of bringing women into masculine spaces because those are considered powerful spaces, we can actually say, actually, power is in kindness. So we can create new gender norms in which a man can say, oh, actually, I don't want to hurt the people that I'm carrying in my body. Of course I put a mirror because I care for them, which maybe today they will say, oh, what are you, a woman? And maybe this man could say, well, if to care it means being a woman, then I'm proud of caring. I think our women have a lot to teach us. I don't know. I went a little bit on a rant. I don't know if that helps with your question, but.
I'm not so sure, but I'll think about it. Yeah.
Think about it, Rose. Yeah, then we can continue the conversation any day. I'll give you my mobile phone, so we can spend hours
discussing it. No problem.
Yes, discussing is easy, eh?
Discussing is easy. It's allowed.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we have more time. Let's see, what's the time? It's 52. Meredith, do we have 1 minute for one last question? What do you
If
think?
there, I think if there is any, I think it will only take you a few minutes to explain the last couple slides. I put in
Yeah.
an idea into the chat box about the discussion that I
I
was
love it.
just contributing. I think whether the man or the woman is displaying a traditionally feminine characteristic, it's about valuing the feminine equally to the masculine.
Right.
And that was
I
my
love
thought.
what you're saying. I love it, and it's also and to build on this beautiful thing that you said. I also think is recognizing that masculine and feminine are energies that are in everyone. That is not because you're a woman you are only feminine, and because you're a man you're only masculine. You know, if showing love and being kind and worrying about people, I don't know if that's feminine, but if it's feminine, well, why can't men also? That energy is potentially also in men. The point is that, you know, we don't need to shy away from it. We need to welcome the feminine energy as men and saying, yeah, I mean, I want, like something I tell my students is, I feel that I am a mother to some of my friends, even though I'm a man. But I feel like to some of my friends, sometimes I'm like a mother to them, right? Okay, well, this conversation could go on, and Meredith, Judith, Rose, and I. Judith said, could that also be attitude related, where the men are trying to show that they can do more, probably because of mastery of a task? And Rose said, the line between determining what is a gender norm and a social neutral norm becomes very thin. And I agree, but in the end, I also am not so sure that it's so important to label these norms as much as it is then when we're designing interventions, right? And we can ask participants as well to what extent this contributes to the definition of men and women. Okay, so what I would ask you, please, to do by the next seminar. When is the next seminar, Meredith? Do you have the date?
It is February 23rd.
Perfect. So if you could think, I would really like you to ask you, because we will start the seminar on February 23rd with this. If you could select one practice that you're working on, so this might be land ownership, it might be access to water, it might be access to employment, it might be domestic violence, anything. And then write down on a piece of paper up to 3 norms that you think protect people from this practice, if it's a negative one. So essentially, let's say 3, let's call them, for ease of use, negative and positive, even though it's not the best term, right? It's fine, it doesn't have to be a negative norm. It can be a protective norm, a positive norm. So, and if you could write it this way, you see, like practice, you could write child marriage or domestic violence or land ownership or access in divorce law, anything. And then the norm, which could be number 1, 2, or 3, in this case is respectable women marry early. Is the function contributing to the harmful practice or protecting people from the harmful practice? In this case, in my example, is contributing. The subject to the norm, who needs to comply with this norm, is adolescent girls who reach puberty. Are there negative and or positive sanction? Yes. Negative sanction in this case, because if you don't get married early, you have less desirable marriage prospects when you reach 18. Who is the reference group? Who is going to approve you or disapprove you? Is the community members, the future in-laws and husbands? And where is this norm active in? And you could say, whenever you're working, in the north of the country, in this region, in this village, in this neighborhood, in this family, in this group of workers, wherever you like. If you could do this, you don't need to send it to us, but just write it, you know, on a document or on a piece of paper. It would be very, very helpful. So, and thank you, Paul, for sharing this paper that we would like all to read, Matriarchy Being Reproduced in the Context of Patriarchy. Thank you. There is also a book that is a narrative book called The Power that it's okay. It's a nice book. It's a fiction book. Okay, I think we are 3 minutes from the end. So I just want to check, unless there is someone who needs to have this exercise clarified, unless there is any clarifying question on this exercise, I guess I'll see you on February 23rd. So I think it's back to you, Mary.
I have a request. Can
Yes,
it be,
please.
can the exercise be emailed to us?
Yes, we'll do that.
You can just, oh yes,
can
the
send-
exercise, yes.
Yeah, we can send the slide out to everyone or put it in the email.
It would just be the last slide in the slide deck.
Exactly.
Okay, well, unless there is any question, I'll pass it back to you, Meredith and Natalie.
Thanks, Ben. I would just look to Grace or Madanda to close us out.
I think Grace should.
Okay, yeah, I think, thank you so much. This has really been, super good and clarifying a number of issues. And members, this is really part of the East African Learning Collaborative Network on Social Norms. And these trainings are part of really building our capacity and sharing, sharing knowledge in order to support us in our work of the network, which includes, researching and documenting the different social norms affecting different areas, includes programming. Then it also includes the advocacy and for policy really reflection and change, and also includes, critical knowledge on theories, developing theories and tools. So I'm glad that now, especially with this session, which we have started with, and I really hope that you can also come for the others, it really gives us a background and a base of understanding what norms are and and also the exercises we shared. And I would urge members, to continue reflecting and also attend the others, because we know now that even in our gender work, that our progress is limited. And even all other programs, talk about social protection, talk about poverty, there is an understanding globally and local that social norms and gender norms are really pivotal in producing the situation that we have globally and even in our country. So they're very important for us to understand. And for sure, we are seeking to really make a difference, to make social norms visible in programming, in policy, in research, in demand advocacy, for the betterment of society. So thank you very much, all of you, and our facilitator. This is really super good. And we look forward for the next session, which is taking place on, Madonna, can you remind me the next date so that we all put it in the...
Yeah, 23rd.
23rd Feb. So Ben, really, thank you so much. And we'll also, if there's other literature or publications that the group and the team can benefit from, please let's share those references. I want to wish you a good day.